proposed legislation before us. The committee members might come and go during the hearing. This is just part of the process. We have bills to introduce in other committees. I ask that you abide by the following procedures to better facilitate today's proceedings. Please silence or turn off your cell phone. Starting with me. Let's see, where are the cell phones, electronic devices. Please move to the reserved chairs in front. You're probably fine there. On either side. For this afternoon, what I'm going to do is just have them kind of do musical chairs. And as they come up and then do their presentation, then they exit out to free up space, and the others just do the musical chairs thing coming forward. That way they hold their places. The introducing senator will make his initial or her initial comments, followed by proponents, opponents, and neutral testimony. Closing remarks are reserved for the introducing senator. If you are planning to testify, please pick up one of the green sign-in sheets that's on the table in the back. Please fill out the green sheet completely, print clearly. This form is used to put in the official record. If you wish to, you can also use the white sheets to sign in to show your record of being present here. If you have any handouts, make sure that you have 10 copies to give out when you come forward. If you don't have 10 copies, notify the pages and they can make copies for you. When you come to testify, please speak clearly into the microphone, tell us your name, and then please spell your first and last name to ensure accuracy. We will be using the light system today. I think this morning we'll go ahead and go with the 5 minutes. Let's see. We'll use the light system. 4 minutes green, 1 minute yellow, and when it turns red, your time is out. You will have the luxury of going beyond that time if needed today. The Secretary of State has afforded that. No displays of support or opposition, vocal or otherwise, will be allowed during this hearing. The committee members with us today will introduce themselves, starting on my right with Senator Conrad.
Morning, Danielle Conrad from North Lincoln.
Jane Raybould, Legislative District 28, the central part of Lincoln.
Good morning, Rita Sanders, District 45, representing the Bellevue Offit community.
Ray Aguilar, District 35.
John Lowe, District 37.
Steve Halloran, District 33.
Megan Hunt, District 8.
All right, and legal counsel Dick Clark on my right, Julie Connon, the committee clerk, on the left corner there. The vice chair is Senator Sanders. And if I have it right, our pages are Quinn and Ryan. Is that right? Wow. I'm right once. All right, with that, we will go ahead and get started on LB 269. Senator Holland, welcome to your government committee.
Good afternoon, Chairman Brewer and members of the Government, Military, and Veterans Affairs Committee. Thank you for letting me bring this important and controversial bill to this committee. For the record, my name is Senator Steve Halloran, STEVEHALLORAN, and I represent the 33rd Legislative District. I'm here today to introduce LB 269, which was brought to me by the Secretary of State's office. The bill would put back into place all of the changes to redistricting timelines that the body made in 2021 under LB 285. These changes were necessary due to the census data being late for the first time in our history. The timeline implemented was successful, and we as a state were able to hold the primary and general election on the statutorily required date and time. It is now time to put back the original deadlines for boundary changes to the original language prior to the start of the 2024 election cycle. A representative from the Secretary of State's office will come after me to discuss the specifics of the bill and answer any questions that you may have. Thank you, Chairman Brewer and members of the committee.
All right, thank you. We'll now take any questions for Senator Holland. All right, none. We'll go ahead and invite up our first testifier. Wayne, welcome back to the Government Committee.
Good morning, Chairman Brewer, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Wayne Benna, W-A-Y-N-E-B-E-N-A. I serve as Deputy Secretary of State for Elections here on behalf of Secretary of State Robert Evnen in support of this bill. As I always start, as this is my first election bill testifying, I have served in this capacity since September 1 of 2017 and previously served as the Sarpy County Election Commissioner 8 years prior to that. So I bring a lot of experience on the county and the state level in regards to election-related issues. If you ever have any questions regarding anything election-related, feel free to reach out to me or a member of my team. And everything is kept on a confidential basis. We're not gossipers, so we'd like to help people understand election law. So our doors are always open. Today's bill is again, I hope non-controversial, but a little bit sad because I'm having to put back everything and all the hard work that we did in 2021 to make the 2022 elections happen. As you were aware, for those members that were here, the census was late in their data for the first time in the history of our country. Normally, we would get it in April. We did not. They had originally maybe said September. Election officials across the country, I included, objected, and we worked out a compromise that we would get some data on August 30th, which was workable. And my office and my division work with every political subdivision in the state to gain feedback of if we cut the timeline in half, could we make it happen? And so this was a labor of love for me, about 6 months worth of work, and probably for me, the second most important thing I've ever done in my career, especially in elections, having this bill pass. But after getting it passed, it had to be implemented. And everyone and every political subdivision met their deadlines, and we were able to have our primary on time. I can say we were the third, this body was the third state body to get the federal redistricting done in the country. And there were 6 or 7 states across the country that did not have their primaries on time, or portions of their primaries not on time because they did not prepare like we did here in Nebraska. So I was very proud of the work that everyone did in this process, from the Secretary of State's office, the governor's office, the legislature, all the way down to a village board to get this all done. But we got through 2022, and now it's time to put things back to where they were. Most of the changes you see here are normally just for redistricting years, so it's probably a little bit early to have to worry about that. But some deadlines that we already have for boundary changes prior to 2024 need to go back to their original December deadlines. That way that there's enough time for one, the counties to get their work done, and second, for candidates to know what districts they live in if they have a requirement to live in the district in a specific amount of time. So all this bill does is to put everything back to where they were prior to 2021. And with that, I'll answer any questions that you may have. And it's probably one of the first times I've never hit yellow. So.
Well, we will normally give you extra time because you're sharing things that we kind of need to know in this committee. But with that, questions for Wayne? All right, thank you. All right, any additional proponents? Anybody here in opposition? Anybody here in the neutral? Senator Holler is waiving closing. So we will give our folks a chance to switch numbers up here. Now we'll close the hearing on LB 269. Did we have any letters? Oh, okay. On 269, we had none in the neutral, none opponents, and 1 pro. Senator Lowe, welcome to your government committee.
We can be done by breakfast. Thank you, Chairman Brewer and members of the Government and Military Affairs Committee. I bring to you another consent calendar bill. My name is John Lowe, that's John Lowe, and I represent District 37, which is made up of Kearney, Gibbon, and Shelton. LB 313 was brought to me by the Secretary of State's office. This bill makes changes and updates to the special election process for when there is a vacancy for the congressional or U.S. Senate seat. after having run a special election this last summer for a congressional seat and having to prepare a special election for the recently vacated U.S. Senate seat, the Secretary of State's office found some areas that they may believe could be improved. This bill tightens the language for when a special election will occur to fill a vacancy in the House of Representatives by requiring an election no sooner than 75 days after the vacancy and no later than 90 days. It clarifies that the election must take place on a Tuesday. It requires that the candidate running in a special election must have their candidate and fees paid at least 67 days prior to the election. LB 313 also addresses the timeline for determining how long an appointed senator will serve before having to run for the election. Previous language mentioned on vacancy occurring 60 days before the general election, while new language specifies August 1st before the general election as a new deadline. It also clarifies the election time if a Senate seat becomes open in a period where there is not an upcoming statewide general election, or appointment happens before August 1st in a general election year. I would be happy to answer any questions, but there are a very prepared individual behind me that could better explain the need of these changes. With that, I close my opening.
All right. Thank you, Senator Lowe. All right, questions for Senator Lowe? Everybody's saving them for that incredibly prepared person behind you. Okay, first proponent.
This must have got controversial because we have security now.
Are you the person he was talking about?
Yeah.
All right. Welcome to the Government Committee.
Good morning again, Chairman Brewer. For the record, my name is Wayne Bena, W-A-Y-N-E, B-E-N-A. I serve as Deputy Secretary of State for Elections here on behalf of Secretary of State Robert B. Evans in support of LB 313. The day that this was introduced, I kind of got a little shock on my face because my birthday is March 13th. So this had to be my bill number. Just luckily it wasn't a hearing date of March 13th. So I told you earlier that I started my career on September 1st, 2017. On my last day as Sarpy County Election Commissioner, I was here actually down in Lincoln serving on an advisory committee for then Secretary of State John Gale on my last day. And the next day I was going to be here in my new role and had two members left that would be joining my team after I hired a few others. And one of the members of my team, now my assistant deputy, Andrew Buller, introduced himself and said the following: "Hi, my name is Andrew Buller. I'm an election specialist. And by the way, the state of Nebraska has not had a special election for Congress since 1951. I said, when it came to me, and I said, Andrew, that's very interesting. One, you have a lot of time on your hands, and I'll take care of that starting tomorrow. But two, you just jinxed us, and now we're going to have one in my tenure. So the next day, I actually took a look at this statute, and there were some things in here I thought, okay, there's some things in here I need to probably change, but I will, it just kind of got put off in my omnibus bills over the years. And actually last year in 2021, I had it ready to go for 2022, the changes I wanted to make. And after the investigation happened, I thought probably not the best idea to probably put this bill up right now. But also we found after having to actually go through the special election, there were a few things in the special election statute that needed to be clarified. And so beyond the one thing that I did want to change, we added a couple other things based upon us having to go through this for the first time in 71 years. And I will tell you, in other states, it's when they look at that, they can't believe it because they have to go through these special elections quite often. But the first change mainly had to do with setting a minimum amount of time in which the election could occur, mainly because this is a federal election. So thus the provisions for military and overseas ballots does apply, which wouldn't necessarily apply in any other special election. So ballots need to go out 45 days in advance to those individuals. So a scenario could pop up in which a governor could select a date in which there would not be enough time to get ballots to military and overseas voters. the DOJ would come in, Department of Justice would come in immediately and sanction the state and put us under a consent order for that. And other states have had to do that. In fact, once the resignation of Congressman Fortenberry happened, the DOJ just so happened to set up a conference call with me because they were aware of the statute and they wanted to make sure the military ballots went on time. So they were aware that this loophole kind of existed in the statute. It didn't occur. We did pick, we went to the 89th day, which got us the most amount of time. However, that caused two other issues. One, we have a statute that says that no special elections can occur in the month of May, June, and July in the state of Nebraska based upon having the primary in the even numbered year. And that all special elections must occur on the second Tuesday after the second Monday in a given month. That was impossible given the when the resignation occurred. We couldn't have it in April. May was not enough time for UOCAVA ballots, so June was the best we could do, and we had to push it as far as we could to the end of the month. So this bill, one, would allow a minimum amount of time, 76 days, that would allow enough time to get all the process done and get military ballots out on time. It would also allow for a special election to occur in any month because the 90 days to fill that vacancy, have the election to fill that vacancy supersedes anything else in regards to the state law. And also it would allow for an election to happen on a Tuesday because people are used to voting on a Tuesday. So I would keep that consistent. And based on this calendar, there would be 2 Tuesdays in any given month that this election could occur. We would want it to be the furthest one to give more time, but just in case there is at least 2 Tuesdays. So that's the first part of the bill. The second part of the bill has to do with U.S. Senate. So go figure, I have both a vacancy in U.S. Senate and U.S. House in the same year. There was the possibility existed that the language inferred that in this scenario that would have happened in this current 2 years, a U.S. Senator that resigned 60 days before a general election, but someone was appointed after the election, that they could serve 4 years. And that wasn't the intent of the legislature when the law was passed, but the wording of it did make it seem like that could be a possibility. So we're moving the language to say is that once a vacancy occurs, like in this situation that we're seeing now, Senator Ricketts will have to stand for election in 24 and 26. That was the intent of the original legislation. This is just making sure. I'm going to stop right now and answer any questions.
You're good. Keep rolling here.
So this will ensure that the process that the legislature wanted is followed, so there couldn't be a technicality. Second, we also thought instead of the 60 days, we move it back to August 1st, because August 1st at least gives 30 days in which in a year that we may have to have an election on the general election ballot for U.S. Senate, enough time for the political parties to put someone on the ballot if need be, or someone to petition onto the ballot. So really that's more of a ballot access decision. What I don't want to happen is if this were to happen and we were to have a election within 60 days or what have you, that the only ballot access would be a write-in, which would be the wild, wild west for a U.S. Senate seat, in my opinion. As you can remember, the California governor's race with 70 or 80 different candidates, at least those names were on the ballot, we would have a write-in election for U.S. Senate, which probably is not in our best interest. So it's moving that deadline back. So just some language changes, given the fact that we haven't had to worry about this since 1951 or 1987. Sometimes we just take a second look and make some updates. So that's what this bill does, and happy to take any questions.
All right, thank you. Now, just out of curiosity, you guys have any way of monitoring the cost to conduct a special election?
Yes. We are actually working on collecting that data right now from the counties. What I can tell you from our perspective, the state and our office felt bad for the counties that had to run this election and they weren't ready for it and not prepared for it. I luckily had received a federal grant around the same time as this, and we designated a portion of that money to help the costs of this election. We as a state only have I can only pay for certain things that are under the procurement process. But one of the things that was the vendor costs for the coding of the ballot, the printing of the ballot, the delivery of the ballot. So our office was able to reimburse the counties approximately $150,000 in costs for those counties that had to have the special election. I figure anywhere between $300,000 and $400,000 on top of that for mailing of the early ballots postage, and then the poll workers for those counties. They didn't necessarily need to have as many poll workers because it was just one thing on the ballot. And typical turnout in a special, it didn't need everything they needed in a normal election, but I think we estimated probably around the $500,000 range, but we're still collecting the data for that. But we did try to supplement and help the counties out because it was kind of an unfunded mandate for them. So,
No problem. All right, thank you. Questions for Wayne?
I had a couple. Thank you, Wayne. Always good to see you. I just was trying to think through kind of how this worked in the most recent special election. And I know it was kind of a perfect storm in some ways where you were conducting a special election and redistricting had just occurred, and that had caused some additional, I think, maybe headache or heartache or confusion for folks. So I think that all got spelled out and perhaps is beyond the scope of this particular cleanup. But I remember there was just a lot of questions about what district boundaries were utilized and when and why. And I didn't know if we were opening it up, if we needed to have some clarification in here, if that was a different chapter and verse, but just wanted to ask you about that while you were here.
this was an interesting year for its ad. It was the perfect storm. I will say this is that, yes, some people on the national level wondered why it was happening this way. And let me go into it a little bit.
Okay.
There's a difference between what our state law does in regards to any other race in the state after redistricting than the federal government does. So in our state, once redistricting happens and it goes into effect, that person in that district represents that district.
Right.
You can't be redistricted out. As you know, Senator Williams represented Sarpy County for a time. You know, you now represent that district, but you can't be redistricted out. You just serve the rest of your term and you choose to move or not. And so I think that's why this body usually chooses a district sometimes that's term limited, because it's the best possible. The U.S. federal government and the U.S. Congress specifically has a rule that once redistricting happens, you cannot provide any services to your new district until another election happens. So for an example, Don Bacon could represent Douglas County and his portion of Sarpy County, but even though that Saunders County would be electing him in the next election, he can provide no services to Saunders County, but has to be elected in Sarpy County or elected in Saunders County. So what our rules say is once the maps were passed here, that's who you represent. But the federal government doesn't recognize that for U.S. House.
Okay.
And I think the U.S. House should come to some compromise of maybe it's dual representation for a small amount of time, or you can, or what have you. So because the maps of the former 1st and 2nd congressional district did not exist anymore, I made the decision, and the decision was made to use the new maps for that special election. And I understand in the calls that I took, I understood it. I completely understand it. And I hope this never happens again in the exact time frame that it happened. But we really need to look to Congress of what they should allow after a redistricting process. And they have their reasons for doing that. But what our rule state is, you represent your district as soon as the map goes into effect. I would like it if Congress would change the rule, because I think it's weird that you're voting, for an incumbent, it's weird for you to campaign but can't help anybody in your district until after that next election. I understand the reason of wanting to use taxpayer resources for that, but Congress would want to change the rules. If this body wanted to change that, that would be a separate policy discussion that I probably would necessarily bring forward, but that is a once in every 10-year, very tight time frame that occurred. And I understood it was strange, but it was the Nebraska way. So
Yeah, it was definitely, I think, unique and a thorny issue to kind of work through there. But I know that it definitely caused some confusion for voters and for election officials. So I just thought, gosh, if we're opening this up and if we need to provide some clarification from the lessons learned to signal to future folks who are in those positions of power, maybe that would be helpful. But maybe it's better as an interim, and that's something that we could talk about or think about.
So we're talking about a vacancy happening in a 10%
Yeah.
course of the number of years in a 10-year period. And again, we hadn't had one since
Right.
71 years.
No,
so,
exactly. Yeah,
um,
exactly.
But, yeah, and there's also a logistical issue. Once we change the maps, everything goes into the voter registration system, which determines your address and your ballot. To go back to that was almost an impossibility.
Yes.
Given our current system of even just the system, but we believe that the law was consistent to what we would have done in any other case.
Right.
Unfortunately, Congress has different rules for their members. So,
That's helpful. Thank you very much. And then just so I'm making sure that I get up to speed on here, this measure, technical in nature, is really just regarding vacancies in the U.S. Congress and the U.S. Senate. It's not for other elected offices, from what I can tell here.
Nope.
And then it's really trying to just harmonize the process between the Senate vacancy and the U.S. House vacancy to a certain degree. Is that right?
I mean, they're two separate. I just put them all together
Yeah.
because it's federal races, but each process had lessons learned from this past year. So they're not equal. They're not trying to make it equal because it's an appointment process, not a special election. But each one of those, based upon our lessons learned, we made little tweaks
Okay.
to be able to, the decisions that we had to make, like having it in June when we're not supposed to technically,
Yeah.
and having it on a fourth Tuesday instead of second Tuesday, we put that into the law that it is implied that you can do that now versus we made the judgment call that the federal law about 90 days superseded any of our laws,
State law.
provisions in
Yeah.
state law regarding when special elections are held. So
Okay, that's helpful. And then the last question I just had, it percolated when you were visiting, and I'm sure the numbers vary for a lot of different reasons, but I think everybody on the committee cares deeply about ensuring overseas voters and military voters have access to the ballot and plenty of time to participate in our democracy. Do you have a sense, like, how many of those go out typically, generally? Is it tens of thousands? Is it hundreds? I don't know what the number, and
I haven't-
if you don't
I
know
can-
off the top of your head, we can.
I've got
Is
it.
it-
I've got it in my bag.
Okay.
Every election's different.
Sure.
More in a presidential election than a gubernatorial election, but I think in this past election we hovered around 700. I think one thing that I take great pride in, and that's because I came from Sarpy County and where
Yeah.
Strategic Air Command is that I did everything I could to make sure that those ballots go out on time, and it is our role in the election division to work with the Department of Justice to make sure. I have a conference call every year before to talk about what our strategy is to make sure that we're getting those ballots on time. And even though we're not required, we do provide a report to the DOJ after of what our statistics were. And I can say is that we haven't missed a ballot going out on time since I've been in my, and we work very closely with our counties. And that week before it's okay.
Yeah.
Are they out? Are they out? Are they out? I even actually built in, we tell everybody Friday, but technically it's Uwakava Saturday. And so just in case of the worst case scenario, we do have one extra built-in day
Smart.
for that. But now I put it on the record so all the counties know. But no one wants to come in on a Saturday. But we've never missed it. And I always kind of laugh that the DOJ lawyer actually is and DC is actually a University of Nebraska law grad. And so
Oh, interesting.
I think I can't remember the name off the top of her head, but you would know her too. And I kind of laugh as DOJ lawyers get promoted after getting like consent agreements or convictions or what have you. And every year I have to tell her, sorry, we got them all out. So, but that's good for us. But we take it very seriously, and we do have good laws in the state that allow for the electronic transmission back, which a lot of states do
Yeah.
not. So
Good point.
most of our ballots are returned back electronically. So we have a very high return rate for the UOCAVA military ballots.
Great, that's really helpful. I started this last one, then I'm done.
Well, and I was gonna follow up to help you on the overseas. You know, it really falls into two categories. So you have those who are stationed at Ramstein or whatever facilities overseas. And that's a cyclic thing. You're always gonna have kind of a generally similar number of those. But then you have those deployed into a combat zone, which in Nebraska's case, we've had as many as 3 battalions, which would be between 1,500 and 2,000 that are in that combat zone doing operations. So for the year that they're deployed, they're going to spike a high number if it happens to hit in an election year. And so sometimes that number can vary quite a little, just depending on how the Guard is being deployed. And that's a big pull because they're all Nebraskans with the
Right.
Guard, where you have some who just happen to be originally from Nebraska serving.
And just last year, we passed a bill here that I was quite proud of. One of a few states that allowed for National Guard members on state orders to have that same protection. If they were on federal orders, they would apply, but state orders, they did not have the UOCAVA protections. We gave them that. So if you're out in Western Nebraska, fighting a wildfire the day before then the weeks prior to an election, we can get you your ballot to you electronically.
And where we were running into problems with that is when I was doing the mission on the southwest border, you'd be a year-long mission there and yet have no ability to come and vote because the mission and the fact that you're not deployed, you're not overseas, you're still stateside. So that I thought was a good catch
was a
that we
good one.
didn't leave them out.
I just-
Okay,
my-
other
I
questions
just have
on
just
LB
one. Okay,
313?
No, you go ahead. I'll sort it out with Wayne later.
My deaf side here. Go ahead.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Rena, for the work that you do. And as a former county commissioner, I'm grateful for the assistance that you gave. But in future special elections, how is the cost distributed? Is it by Steven, by the number of counties, or is it by the population per head in
So,
the county?
this is one thing that you've learned on the county level.
Yeah.
A political subdivision, so a county election office can only retrieve costs from everyone except the county, which pays their budget, state and federal. So the race for governor isn't reimbursed. The race for legislature is not reimbursed. What I will say is one commitment that I had, and one of the main reasons that I took this job when I did, I love being in SARPI, and I wanted this job to get the new equipment because we were running down the end of our life cycle. So it was important for me when I took this job to find a way to be able to pay for it as a way for the state to share in the costs of running an election, even though that they can't charge us for governor or legislature. The state paid for all the new equipment statewide, which did not then have to be put, and then we pay for the maintenance, which not is bared on the property taxpayers of the counties. But the counties can get reimbursed from the cities, school boards, OBPDs, NRDs, et cetera, but not any state or federal races.
So then, okay, thank you very much. And then the other question that I have is, I know in the bill, it says such election shall be held on a Tuesday, which seems standard. But does that impact any of the early voting or coming and voting at the county election commissioner's office on a Monday? Does that have any impact? I know we're going to have a lot of bills coming up that'll probably change some of that, maybe?
The reason why
Yeah.
we picked the Tuesday is because then if you back up all the other election dates, they would fall in the same days. So like 10 days before the election for voter registration would fall on the same Friday. If there happened to be a holiday or what have you, state law provides either before or after. But the Tuesday was picked, one, as we said, people are used to voting on a Tuesday. but it's easy to work back the same deadlines for voter registration, early voting. None of those change, but they fall on the exact same days, having it on the Tuesday. If you have it on a Wednesday, the Friday deadline becomes now Thursday, and that gets that's where the confusion can start. So Tuesday was picked, so everything else actually is consistent.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
Okay, additional questions?
I just had one more.
Yes,
That's it. Just one
Senator
more.
Conrad.
Thank you, Senator Brewer. Wayne, the one thing that I was thinking about in regards to Senator Raybould's question too, that I know posed some confusion or maybe some headache or heartache in the recent special election for Congress was, in the first congressional district, as I understand it, which makes sense to some degree with our strong tradition of local control, but there was really wide differences in terms of how the elections were conducted county by county in the same congressional district. I think maybe some of those counties are all mail counties that went out, and then maybe not. I can go back and triple check the record.
Yeah, and yes, what I would say is it would have been that special election was handled in the same manner as a primary or general election, statewide election would have been held. So the same, everyone that had a polling site had a polling site. Every by mail county still did it by mail or had a by mail precinct. So it was conducted in the same manner, just in a smaller, just one congressional district. But that special election was conducted in the same manner as the May primary. There were no differences except just a smaller pool of people. So
yeah, okay, that's one thing that I want to kind of just think through the equity of, and just making sure that we have a similar process perhaps in the district, and if not, why not kind of question there. And then I know, different counties have different approaches to a permanent absentee list or special requests in that. And so I just know, talking to a lot of the voters in our neighborhood, that people, were very engaged citizens and were just really confused about right after the primary, the special election, and really regardless of party, we're just kind of, I think, grappling with it because it wasn't commonplace situation for them to deal with either. So
it was the perfect storm. 12 days would have got it in July.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
12 days difference would have put it in July, which would have probably had a little separation, would have had it in a in a month. You could have a special election and could have had it on the Tuesday that you would normally have a special election. But again, this was the first time this was ever happening. We wanted to get the most amount of time, especially coming right off a primary. So we did it on the 89th day versus the 90 days that were allowed. So
yeah, and if memory serves, I think you were working really hard with the candidate campaigns to try and be fair and kind of sort through things with everybody, which really appreciate, and is part and parcel for how you do your work, and really appreciate that. I was just trying to kind of think through, like, if we have a special election in Lincoln for like a school bond or something like that, I know it's a different kind of special election, but like we automatically get ballots, which is great and improves turnout. And I know then we have some counties that are all mail and they automatically get ballots. So just kind of trying to think about if there's ways to increase participation and take some of the burden off of the local officials and have more uniformity. I'm just brainstorming about that.
what I can say in regards to that is that it's the option of the county clerk or election commissioner to do the special election by mail. They don't have to.
Sure.
So that school bond issue could have easily been a bond election, or a poll site election, excuse me. So I will say is there are still special elections in the state that the clerk chooses to have it by polling site. So it is up to this. When we examined this special election, we didn't necessarily see the authority for the Secretary of State to call it by mail because it was different than a local election where the filing officer is the clerk or election commissioner. So running this election was similar to a statewide primary or general election where we wouldn't have that ability, was the default method for doing this specific one. But I just didn't want you to think that all special elections have to be by mail. It's a choice. So,
Right, right. Okay, thank you so much. Thanks.
All right, any other questions on LB 313? All right, thank you for your testimony.
I may see you this afternoon.
All right.
Yes.
You just
I hope
sit on Your
so.
seat right now.
It won't be the same without you. Okay, any additional testifiers on LB 313? In any category? All right, with that, we'll go to John Lowe. He waives closing. That will end our hearing on LB 313. If we could go ahead and clear the room, I'd like to keep the committee here just for a minute. Oh, I need to read in, 0 opponents, 0 neutral, and 1 proponent. If I keep the committee just for a second, I want to talk about septic.